Hello and welcome into the GSMC Sports Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host TJ Mabardi. Today is Tuesday, April 23rd, and we are going to be continuing on to talk a lot of NBA playoffs as we had a set of different Game 2 matchups that took place last night. So we are going to be diving into all of the results there. We are additionally at the end of the show going to be touching on the trade from the New York Jets, moving on from quarterback Zach Wilson, sending him to the Denver Broncos. So we're going to be diving into that, what it means for both teams, sort of reflecting on Wilson's time in New York. But before we dive into everything, just a reminder to like, follow, subscribe wherever you keep up with us. Help us grow this channel. Check us out on social media and on our YouTube platforms for some short videos, some exclusive content there. Additionally, for any of our live viewers, if you would consider using the comment section, give us your thoughts on the latest happening in sports. We can make this show as interactive as possible. And if you would consider leaving a tip or donation, you can use the link gsmcpodcast.net. Help get your comments the top priority they deserve. Helps us a lot out as show hosts as well. Anything would be greatly appreciated on that front. But I wanted to start the show today by talking about the NBA games from last night. We're going to be starting in Denver, the home of the reigning NBA Finals champions, with the Denver Nuggets, who faced off against the Lakers and pulled off a 20-point comeback to battle their way back into this game, and they end up winning on a buzzer beater from Jamal Murray. We got an incredible slate of NBA games last night, so we're absolutely going to get into everything there. But the Nuggets were down by 20 points in the third quarter, and they battled their way back. They did not hold a lead against the Lakers up until that Jamal Murray shot, at least in the fourth quarter, and they end up winning this game 104. They end up winning this game on the buzzer beater. It was tons of fun to watch in this one. The Lakers were cruising early with some very well executed offense. They were shooting well from three. D'Angelo Russell, who was really talked about during Monday's conversations because of how bad he performed over the weekend. He ends up knocking down 6 3-pointers in the first half, got out in the first few minutes and went 3 for 3 from the 3-point line. So he was impressive. Anthony Davis was just taking it to Jokic on the other end. They were both matched up. Davis finished the first half with 24 points on 11 of 12 from the field. And then he even came out in that second half, rolled hard a couple times, took the passes from LeBron James, and scored over Jamal Murray for a couple and ones. So it seemed like the Lakers were in prime position here. They weren't turning the ball over, which was a big issue for them in game one. But in the third quarter, things started to change where it seemed like Anthony Davis, again, who was really the main catalyst for the Lakers in a lot of this game, he sort of seemed to wear out a little bit. I'm not sure if it maybe had to do with the fact that he was being asked to do so much offensively while also guard Nikola Jokic on the other end. And he was doing a pretty good job of holding up Jokic for a lot of that game. But once he went to the bench with a few minutes left in that third quarter, Jokic got himself going more from an offensive standpoint. He took Hachimura to the basket on back-to-back possessions and finished over him. And then on the third possession there, he ended up getting double-teamed and he found Christian Brown open on the elbow. And that was sort of the groove that he needed to sort of get back into after going scoreless from the first quarter until the third. But offensively, with Anthony Davis in this situation, again, on the idea that he sort of started to tire out, his touch from outside of the paint was actually really good for a while there. He was knocking down some jump shots in the mid-range, and then that started to waver as well. He turned the ball over a couple times, which was sort of why I think that Darvin Ham decided to pull him out of the game when he did during that third quarter, because it just seemed like he was really getting exhausted. And he wasn't alone in that. LeBron, I think, also was dealing with some fatigue and started catching up with him a little bit. He played all but 57 seconds in that third quarter. And for a large stretch of that third quarter, it was him and Anthony Davis spamming the pick and roll, just sort of carving up the Denver defense. Because of that, he really wasn't getting much help from the rest of the Lakers, which is something we're going to touch on as well here. But the Lakers, for how well they shot the ball from three in the first half, that sort of started falling off, and just the offensive ball movement really wasn't there. But despite all of this, they still carried a 10-point lead into the fourth quarter. The Lakers were definitely benefiting from the fact that the Nuggets were sort of off of their game. Jamal Murray wasn't hitting his shots. He was really struggling in this one. I believe he was 3 of 18 from the field headed into the fourth quarter. It seemed like the Nuggets were getting some good looks, but they just weren't falling. And the Lakers really capitalized on this. They were playing with a lot of energy. They got Russell and Anthony Davis really going from an offensive standpoint early in this one. LeBron had some huge defensive plays in this game as well, both early and late. He took the charge. He blocked the Jamal Murray shot layup in the first quarter. He ended up getting a big steal in the fourth quarter as well. But again, I think that a lot of this was the Nuggets sort of just coming out very poor, which is a story we've seen with them in the past, specifically in this matchup as well, where it seems like the Lakers have a great chance to win, and this was just about as good of a chance to win as it seemed like they could have gotten. But then as the game went on here, they just weren't able to hold off this juggernaut in the Nuggets, where their late game execution is just on another level. I pointed to a few games during the final month or so of the regular season with the Nuggets where they were sort of losing some of these uncharacteristic games in these one-score games. But this is why you do have to sort of put the regular season aside, and when the lights are brightest, we see the Nuggets are able to, when they are fully healthy, come up in these instances. And really, in comparing them to how the Lakers operated their offense down the stretch of this game, it's sort of night and day, where just the ball movement from Denver always moving around to the Lakers, where really it's just LeBron James for the most part with the ball. Yes, Anthony Davis was involved in some pick and roll looks, but it's not like he was necessarily being assertive, giving different looks himself. He only ended up taking one shot in the fourth quarter as a whole. So, it's just tough to see. And you know what? LeBron James gave them a really good chance down the stretch there, where he had that defensive play, like I mentioned, stealing the ball from Jamal Murray and getting himself a transition dunk. With just under a minute left, LeBron used an Anthony Davis screen to get down the left lane and get himself a layup that put them up 2 with 47 seconds left. He did also create, it didn't end up falling, but he created a look for himself at the top of the key, as I think it was Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. It almost looked like he was trying to draw a foul a little bit, but no call there. LeBron takes the three. He's not able to hit it. That likely could have iced the game with 16 seconds left in it. But, on the other end, it was Jamal Murray, who we know can hit these difficult shots, and he just wasn't for a lot of this game. But in the fourth quarter, he had it going, hit a couple tough ones in that final minute, including the buzzer beater to win the game. He went 6 of 8 from the field in the fourth quarter, scored 14 points. There was also that instance there when it just comes to, I can't even give the Nuggets all too much props for the play, I guess, because it was so dysfunctional. But with 1:15 left in the game, Michael Porter Jr. hit a 3 to tie the game at 95, but that came off of Jokic. It had seemed like he was trying to draw some type of a foul. We've seen him plenty of times throughout his career try and get that, 35-foot shooting foul that there's just no way it's ever really going to happen. But that's his, big goal that he's hunting after. And he just sort of chucks it up the court. It almost goes out of bounds, but Aaron Gordon does a great job to keep it inbounds, sort of, tiptoes along the baseline, throws it back out to Michael Porter Jr., who hits that three. That could have been a massive turning point after Jamal Murray had just gotten stripped by LeBron James for that go-ahead dunk, and giving the Lakers the ball on back-to-back possessions without getting a shot off could have been very demoralizing. But, either way, they do end up cashing in then. Jokic was incredible on the night as a whole. 27 points, 20 rebounds, 10 assists. The TNT broadcast put up a stat that he had just as many 20-20-10 games with 4 as the rest of NBA history. We know Jokic is a monster. He's already, I think proving any doubters wrong at this point. I feel like they're very far and few, but he is an all-timer, absolutely. One of the most skilled big men we have ever seen in the game of basketball. And it is a ton of fun to watch him go to work. And that being said, it did seem like in this game for a bit there, for a good while, that Anthony Davis was actually getting the best of him, where they were matched up against each other throughout the entire first half. And Anthony Davis was putting on the scoring performance he was. Now, maybe I'm giving Nuggets coach Mike Malone a little bit too much credit. I don't think it's, too crazy to put it out there, but I feel like he was sort of okay with that, knowing that in the second half he could provide a different look and try and disrupt the Lakers' offense. He ended up putting Aaron Gordon on Anthony Davis down the stretch, had Jokic sort of take a load off defensively and guard Rui Hachimura, who was really struggling offensively in this game. And I think that that's really when we saw Anthony Davis fall out of his comfort zone and sort of disappear in this one. And I don't know, again, maybe I'm reaching a little bit on that one, but I feel like that's just the type of thing. Mike Malone is a great head coach, and it seems like he is sort of thinking ahead, making these adjustments, where on the other end, I don't think that Darvin Ham is quite as capable of playing these types of chess games within the actual boundaries of the start of a game to the end of a game. So, either way, it's not like Anthony Davis, when I say he was invisible, I mean, he was still involved in a lot of this action with LeBron James in terms of setting screens, and it's not like he was just standing in the corner doing nothing necessarily, but he just, for somebody who had put up 30 plus points and was dominating early, it was just a complete fall off for him in terms of being the aggressor. And I feel like it's a combination of things, probably the fact that he was having to guard Jokic as much as he was, and it's a tough task to be able to go out and guard Jokic for 40 minutes and also be the aggressor on the other end and try and work through a physical defender in Aaron Gordon. But that's where I feel like the coaching advantage definitely is with Denver in this type of a series, because the Lakers couldn't make anything easier for Anthony Davis, and there was no emphasis to get him involved, really. So, I don't know. But on that sort of note, in terms of in-game adjustments, I've never been a super anti-Darvin Ham person. I know that a lot of Lakers fans have been, and that's probably in part to the fact that they are just inherently more in tune with some of these Lakers games than I am. I watch the Lakers a lot, but in terms of rotations and certain in-game adjustments during an 82-game regular season, I can't be quite as locked in on some of these. And I also feel like the narrative that can get thrown around of LeBron James's head coach is never good enough, and that's why we always see the changes. I feel like it can be a little bit overplayed at times, but this was a really bad look, I thought, for Darvin Ham last night. not being able to adjust to a team like this that you knew you were going to have to face if you had any postseason aspirations as the head coach of the Lakers. The Nuggets were going to, at some point, be on your schedule. And this is the exact same team that swept you in a close series last year. So yes, it was a sweep, but you were in every single one of those games, and that's kind of, I know that game one wasn't quite as close as this one, but still had chances to win in each of these games, I feel like. And there were just a handful of different things, not being able to adjust to the Nuggets defense that they were throwing out there. I thought that he stuck with the bench unit far too long for Taurean Prince, Spencer Dinwiddie, and Gabe Vincent all being double digits in minutes. Dinwiddie and Vincent haven't really provided anything for this Lakers team all season long, and they're getting the amount of playing time they are. Jackson Hayes was out there just for a little bit, but again, wasn't getting anything from him either. He's a nice energy guy, but when you talk about actual discipline on the basketball court, he just doesn't really belong on the same court as Jokic. And this might be more of a personnel issue with the team itself, which is why they were involved in so many trade rumors during the deadline season. But, I do feel like when you look at the fact that none of the Lakers starters played 40 minutes, you had 3 Nuggets starters play 40 minutes. Now, it's not entirely equivalent. I know Anthony Davis was dealing with some foul trouble. LeBron James is old. But it just felt like a lot of run from a bench unit that is not championship caliber necessarily. And I don't know, if you are going to throw that bench unit out there, I feel like there's got to be something in terms of staggering minutes with some starters or having some actual sets to try and get easier opportunities. Again, the amount of passing that was going on with the Lakers felt pretty non-existent, and the ball movement on the other side with the Nuggets, and even when those bench unit players came in, Christian Brown and Peyton Watson were playing legitimate, impactful minutes at the end of the third quarter and the fourth. So I don't know, they just had no counters for the Nuggets' defensive changes, really for their offense either at the end of that game as well. And Lakers insider Anthony Irwin put out a report the other day that Ham is expected to be back as the head coach next season. But I feel like depending on how this series goes, we could definitely be reevaluating that situation. But I ultimately here with this game, I feel like the Lakers had to sort of steal this one in order to have a chance in the series. I never really bought into them having a great chance as it was. But for them to play as well as they did for a lot of the game, and for the Nuggets to struggle like they did, to not be able to come out with this. Now the series is going to go back to LA. They'll get their home court advantage and maybe try and work themselves into a rhythm. But the margin of error against a team as talented as the Nuggets is just so slim. And I feel like this is one that really hurts. They were outcoached. They were outplayed by the players themselves. Again, I wouldn't even say they were fully outplayed too, because of how much better they looked than the Nuggets, at least coming into the game. But down the stretch, at least from a player and coaching perspective, they were shorthanded, and it obviously came through with the amazing execution by the Nuggets down the stretch. But this is a very tough one to swallow if you are a Lakers fan, and not gonna, dive into big picture necessarily all too much yet. We still have a series. Let me know in the comments section if you feel like there is anything the Lakers can do to sort of swing this series, and whether or not you think that they have a chance. But we are going to be taking our first break, and when we come back on the other side, we're going to be diving into the 76ers Knicks game. So stick with us, and we will be right back.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient. Hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing. Sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the news if it's some moosey shit. A stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast. We just talked about the Lakers-Nuggets game that took place last night. Now, this was the second of an unbelievable national TV doubleheader because right before that game tipped off, we had some late game dramatics in New York as the Knicks knock off the 76ers in a fascinating way to extend their lead to 2-0 in this series against Philly. This did have a little bit of a similar feel, I feel like, in terms of the Lakers and the Sixers sort of needing a game like this if they wanted a chance to win the series. And after having it sort of in their grasp, letting it slip through the cracks does hurt them. They could have taken a game on the road. They had the opportunity to, and they end up blowing it late. But in this instance, it wasn't them building up a 20-point lead. It was them having a 5-point lead with 30 seconds left in the game. The 76ers, that is. Jalen Brunson ends up knocking down a corner three to make it a 2-point game. Philly goes to inbound it. Kyle Lowry sort of rushed the inbounds pass. He gets it to Maxey, who is swarmed by both Jalen Brunson and Josh Hart. He ends up hitting the ground. Hart rips it away from him. And the Knicks actually missed their first attempt as Dante DiVincenzo couldn't knock down the three-pointer. But Isaiah Hartenstein, who has been an animal for New York this season, he grabs the offensive rebound. They reset, and DiVincenzo knocks down the second attempt. Philly calls a timeout. They actually get a pretty good look to, again, at this point, it's a 1-point Knicks lead. The 76ers still have a great chance to win this game. Nick Nurse draws up a play where it's Tyrese Maxey starting in the backcourt. He ends up flying up the court. We know the type of acceleration that he has. He gets himself to the rim past the defense, but again, it's Isaiah Hartenstein making the big hustle play, coming from behind and blocking the shot. OG Anunoby ended up sealing the game on some free throws. Embiid got not a great look. He ended up with a heave to try and tie the game, but that doesn't fall, and the Knicks win 104-101. But a lot of sort of controversy and drama coming with the end of this one for a couple reasons. A lot of it sort of slanted in favor of the 76ers because of the fact that it looked like Nick Nurse was sort of hedging the line of whether or not he wanted to call a timeout. He was sort of had his hands up ready for it, but I don't think he actually officially called it at one point. During the inbounds pass itself, you almost saw him pull his hands away as if he thought it was clean and he didn't want the timeout at that point. But then Maxey gets tied up in this situation, and by the time he was looking to call that timeout again officially, I mean, it was very bang, and the refs are obviously watching the play itself. So it's, I don't know, up to your interpretation whether or not you think the 76ers got the short end of the stick on this one. I feel like it wasn't maybe necessarily the cleanest look for the refs, but the 76ers are now filing a grievance with the NBA for the way that this played out. They think that Tyrese Maxey was fouled on the inbounds and the fact that they had tried to call the timeouts ultimately, I was sort of okay with just letting it play out how it did. Nick Nurse, if he wanted the timeout, he had the opportunity with Lowry with the ball inbounding to sort of reset if he didn't initially like the look. And for Maxey himself, while he's on the ground, I feel like at that point, can't let the ball up, even just hold on as tight as possible, make it a jump ball if anything, but you can't have it stripped from you in this type of an instance. So I don't know, let me know if you think. I feel like this is just sort of the situation where in late games the refs should be less involved. Now I also understand not making a call is in some sense a call as well, so I don't feel super definitively on it either way, but I don't feel like the 76ers were necessarily, totally. It's definitely a conversation, but I wouldn't say that they solely lost because of the referees. They still had a, great chance in this game, and they just sort of let it fall apart for them where they had the upper hand for a lot of the night. They led the entire first half. They led through most of the third quarter. The Knicks ended up taking a lead at the end of it. But in the fourth quarter, Tyrese Maxey really started getting himself going. He was incredible in this game. I thought he was the best player on the court, at least from his performance last night. But he ended up giving the 76ers the lead with a couple minutes left, operating that two-man game with Joel Embiid, used Embiid as a screener to get himself a look in the mid-range, and then he got a three after running a possession where, again, it was just Maxey and Embiid. Maxey was actually sort of stonewalled by Josh Hart initially, but he ended up passing it into Embiid. Hart overhelped there, and that opened up Maxey for a deep three-pointer to put them up four with a couple minutes left. He scored 15 points in that final quarter, put up 35 points, 10 assists, and 9 rebounds on the night. And this was with him being questionable headed into the game because he was dealing with an illness. So he got a little bit of his flu game on. And again, I thought he was the best player in this game individually. And again, in terms of Philadelphia not being able to capitalize on a situation, it was another underwhelming Jalen Brunson night. He was off once again. He was 8 of 29 from the field in this game, following up on his 8 of 26 performance in game 1. Now, Brunson did hit the corner 3 with about 27 or so seconds left, so he ends up having the big shot and all is well, but this was a situation where the 76ers really just needed to capitalize and they weren't able to. Quickly, though, I do want to just sort of throw it out there. I know that a lot of people are very anti-Tobias Harris, and I definitely would not consider myself his number one fan, but something that did sort of stick out to me late in this game was the fact that Brunson got Harris switched onto him on 4 different possessions in those final 4 minutes, and Tobias Harris led him to going 0 of 4 on those possessions. So I thought he deserved some credit for that. But either way, with Brunson here, I think that Knicks fans should be looking to spin this in a positive light. The fact that they're up 2-0 in the series against a solid Philadelphia team, despite Jalen Brunson's play, means that I can't imagine this level of inefficiency would continue, throughout their entire playoff run. The Knicks are the better team, so, they have the edge in this series in particular, and I'm just not ready to count out Brunson as a whole after the type of season that he had. But that being said, as they continue on a postseason run and they're forced into facing more difficult competition, they are absolutely going to need him in order to be considered a true contender. It's been encouraging to see them pull out these games without the elite Brunson play that we know he can give, and there's just going to be a certain point where they can't sort of muddy things up some of the role players. It was awesome to have them establish themselves, start off the series at home at Madison Square Garden to get themselves going. But that's only going to take them so far. They're already down Julius Randle, their second leading scorer. They're going to need Brunson. Cannot make that more clear. But one thing that I guess, again, I think Brunson's going to bounce back. But if things weren't to, maybe you could have some sort of a storyline going on here. He is a lead guard. He's a little bit on the smaller side. He has been tasked so heavily this season with carrying the offensive load and lifting up this team and, putting together a 50-win season. But we have seen in the past certain guards sort of tire out in the postseason after being asked to do so much in the regular season. Some recent examples that just came to the top of my mind when sort of kicking around this idea were Isaiah Thomas during his prime seasons on the Celtics, and one of the most notorious postseason chokers, if you want to label him that, in James Harden, where, usage-wise, he has been, during those prime years in Houston, I don't think there was a player that was asked to do more for their team during the regular season. They even got rid of a center at one point, and he was one of their leading rebounders, just being asked to sort of initiate everything for them. But again, I wouldn't go that direction yet. Feel like it takes, a couple more of these performances from Brunson before we sort of dive into that conversation as a whole. But like I said, the role players for New York have been massive for them up to this point in the series. We've seen Josh Hart put together a couple really impressive performances early on. The late game threes in game 1, in this game 2, the 76ers actually sort of changed up their strategy after being willing to leave Josh Hart wide open for game 1, and he ultimately made them pay. But in this game, it almost seemed like it gave Hart a little bit of an edge, and it gave him some confidence, especially how things played out late. I feel like this was a prime example of being able to thrive off of the home court energy, which, by the way, Madison Square Garden has been tremendous in terms of energy up to this point. As much as, as a Boston fan, can't say that I'm a Knicks fan by any means, but New York is a different environment when that team is good, and it's, definitely in the top 2. I would say Oklahoma City was also a tremendous environment, game 1 as well. But again, home court advantage for the Knicks. They've had Hart step up, went 4 of 7 from 3 in this second game, finished with 21 points and 15 rebounds. He was pulling up in transition from 3, knocking it down. I thought that he was really impressive. But again, don't let those 15 rebounds also fly under the radar as well. One of the best rebounders in the league, at least considering his height. But on the note of rebounding, also Isaiah Hartenstein, who I've already given some love to in this show already. Just the hustle plays and second chance opportunities he creates for this Knicks team is so impactful. He ends up being thrown into a bigger role this season due to Mitchell Robinson being injured, and he has absolutely thrived in it. He's now getting starting minutes for them, and he's making a legitimate big-time impact. Already talked about the offensive rebound and block that he had late in this game, but just the physicality he's been playing with against Embiid while they're matched up in these first 2 games has been really impressive. Obviously, playing against somebody of Joel Embiid's stature who's been so dominant, especially in recent years, can be a little intimidating, but Hartenstein sort of understands that, especially at this point with the vulnerability of Embiid because he's not fully healthy, he has an edge on certain instances. And, there were a couple offensive possessions I really liked from Hartenstein where he was looking to go after Embiid a little bit more. Not that he's necessarily posting him up back to the basket, but he doesn't seem scared of Embiid either where he also had a couple big-time push shots in the fourth quarter as well, with Embiid nearby him. So I think that he's been extremely impressive for them as well. You had Bogdanovich and McBride playing some big minutes for them, making some plays specifically at the beginning of the fourth quarter to help set the tone and make sure the crowd was still into it there. But just talked about Joel Embiid not being fully healthy. Now, this is something we already talked about at length yesterday, so I'm not going to dive into all of that again. Embiid, it's still impressive what he's able to do, considering he basically has one leg. It seems like during some of these moments, puts up 34 points, so he wasn't bad in my eyes. He still is a very impactful player, but it's just a matter of, you can see he's not all fully there. And when the Knicks are making these types of hustle plays and having the slight edge in the rebounding department, I do think that that is at least partially due to the fact that Embiid is not 100% healthy. He isn't fully mobile. I think that he only had one rebound in the second half last night. So, Embiid still provides a lot of good. Again, the scoring output is there, not quite as effective as we've seen him, especially in recent years. He was able to operate the two-man game with Tyrese Maxey as well, but ultimately, it really just is a shame for the 76ers and for NBA fans in general, even if you're not the biggest fan of sort of the style of play that Embiid puts out there. He is, one of the most dominant players we've seen in recent history, and we just haven't been able to see how that fully translates to the playoffs, considering the fact that he's always dealing with these injuries. I wouldn't say, we have a lot of big time what ifs in the history of the sport that were, injuries cut short and never fully got a chance to develop. I feel like we've seen just about, at times at least, the maximum version of Joel Embiid, and we got MVP Embiid last season. We had 35 points per game Embiid for the first half of this year. So it's not like it's one of those things of what would he look like if he were a fully finished product. We've seen that, but the what if with Embiid sort of surrounds, what if he could just actually be healthy in the playoffs? What would that look like? We don't really have the answer, and I don't feel great about Philly's chances. I like their chances more than I like the Lakers' chances to come back. But at the same time, I feel like they are in a very difficult position. Now, there are things that can sort of turn around here. A lot of their bench players have sort of been ineffective. Again, I touched on it yesterday. Buddy Hield, and just the way that he hasn't actually been even really attempting the three-point shots that they brought him in for has definitely hurt them at times, and they need to find ways to win these non-Embiid minutes, or at least limit them, and that has not been working up to this point. But let me know what you think on Philly's chances, if there are any types of adjustments, because I think that Nick Nurse is a great coach. I feel like he is capable of making in-game adjustments and putting on different game plans. I don't think it's just Jalen Brunson not being good. I feel like the 76ers are, specifically applying different looks to Brunson to force him off of his game, and I give him credit for that, but I'm just not totally sure how much better this gets for Philly down the stretch of this series. But again, if you feel differently, definitely feel free to let me know in the comment section. But we're going to be taking our second break here, and when we come back on the other side, we will be diving into a little bit of the Cavaliers Magic series that also just wrapped up their second game last night. So stick with us, and we will be right back with more on that.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more.
GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast. We've talked some Lakers, Nuggets, just talked about some Sixers, Knicks. Now I want to sort of dive into here on a little bit of the ugly stepchild, at least from the iconic night that last night was, because we had the Magic and the Cavaliers facing off. Now, not saying it was a terrible game necessarily, but in terms of the glitz and glamour that these other had with the incredible finishes, this one was a lot more of a defensive matchup, a little bit of a rock fight, and it was very low scoring as the Cavaliers came out on top in this one. The second straight game where neither team had scored 100 points. Cavs in this one, 96-86. Magic have been held to 83 and 86 points in each of their first two games this series. Now, you do have to give the Cavaliers some credit for the level of defense that they're playing and the strategy behind it. They were a top 7 unit in defensive rating throughout the regular season, and their play on that side of the ball did sort of dip off a little bit towards the end of the season, but right now they're back and are playing as good as they possibly can be up to this point. It seems like they are doing, in particular, a really good job of taking the paint away from Orlando, who that is where this team does sort of rely on getting their points. But on that note, the Magic haven't been a great offense this season, and it's because of the fact that they don't have the level of spacing that the majority of playoff teams do. They were 29th in the league in three-pointers made this season, and they were only ahead of the Detroit Pistons, who of course went on to have the franchise's worst record in its history. They shoot just 35% as well, and the Cavs are clearly just so unafraid to give up threes. They were letting up open corner three opportunities too, and they just weren't falling for the Magic. Jonathan Isaac was just standing in that right corner basically all game long, firing away. Very rarely did he have anybody in his vicinity, really, and he went 1 of 7 from 3, 6 of those coming in that corner, pretty much uncontested. So, this is a Magic team that I've already said, don't want to bury them too much because I feel like right now everything you can say about them is a little bit on the negative side. I have no doubt that Paolo Banchero is going to be a future star of the league. He got his first All-Star appearance this year, and he's going to be special for a while. He does, you saw he led his team in points, rebounds, assists, all of that during the regular season. So I think he's going to be great. But this is a Magic team that I wouldn't quite say they overachieved necessarily because they are talented, but to be able to, be in competition for one of those top seeds in the Eastern Conference in a year where they were more slated into that play-in tournament threshold, you do have to absolutely give them credit for it. They have things they need to work on, though, and that is just a fact that they need more spacing. They probably need, as much as Paolo has at least shown a lot of development as a playmaker as well, could probably benefit from a true point guard. And I like Jalen Suggs a lot. I thought that was going to be a little bit more of his game when he was coming into the NBA. Now he's more so just a 3-and-D guy, not necessarily creating for himself, but solid as a catch and shooter. I mean, I still look back at Markelle Fultz and the way that his career is unraveled. When he first got to Orlando, too, I thought that he was going to be a perfect fit there with a fresh start, be able to help lead this upcoming young core, and he's just sort of fallen off the map for them. Didn't get a ton of minutes. He played briefly there when Jalen Suggs was dealing with his knee injury. Not sure what his status is going to be going forward. He was able to come back, but he could put no pressure on it when he was being carried off the court. I like Franz Wagner a lot, but it just seems like at times with him, the level of creation, now he can get downhill some, and maybe part of the issue is that the Magic don't necessarily have all that much spacing anyways to surround him with, but he went from scoring 17 points in the first half to going 0 for 7 in the second half, scoring just 1 point off of a free throw, and he himself isn't somebody who provides much from a spacing perspective either, but that's my take on the Magic. I do like them a lot. I like the future with them, but I almost feel bad because every time I do talk about them, at least in these past couple days, it comes off more negative than I would like it to. But I just don't think that they're ready for this moment right now, which is totally fine because they weren't expected to be a postseason team, and they are one of the youngest cores in the NBA. So all that to be said about the Magic. The Cavaliers here, I wanted to talk a little bit about whether or not they're different this year, because last season they were a very exciting team coming into the playoffs. They faced off against the New York Knicks in the first round, and really they just got punked physically. They got exposed from an offensive perspective in terms of sort of the redundance that we see with the Garland-Mitchell combo, along with the Allen Mobley combo. But I mean, it is, we've definitely seen some steps in the right direction. If you want to go from the offensive perspective, one development, at least early on in this series, that I've been seeing that I am a huge fan of is the fact that Evan Mobley is being more aggressive. And it's not like he's going out there scoring 20 points in these games, but he's sort of willing to actually take it to Orlando more often. And a couple times, he's had to go up against Jonathan Isaac, who is one of the best defenders in the NBA, and it hasn't all been perfect for him necessarily, but I like to see a hungry version of him, somebody who his expectations have really fluctuated through the first few years of his career, but he does absolutely have a high ceiling. We already know what he can provide from a defensive standpoint, but if he can start to develop this offensive game, I mean, there are some, and I'm not going to dive into them right now because, again, I'm not trying to set the bar too high for him once again, but there are some names that his game does remind a little of when he is actually sort of hitting at his best that we know he can. But it's been him. It's been the fact that I feel like their wing play has been much improved this season from both Karis LeVert, who I believe is one of the most underrated players in the NBA, really. I know that the consistency of it isn't always there, but I feel like he is a great scorer off the bench for this team, can actually play make pretty well from a wing position, and just shows up with tons of energy. And Isaac Okoro as well, who still is not the perfect offensive player, not extremely refined necessarily, but has upped his three-point shooting every season he's been in the NBA. Now is shooting 39% from three, is shooting 40% from beyond the break, meaning not in the corners. So I think he's, been an important development for them once again. All of this being said, I still don't know if this is necessarily about them being how much better they are now, or if it's that the Orlando Magic maybe just don't have the offense to fully compete in a playoff series like this, where, the Cavaliers are going to have a much bigger task ahead of them. They are most likely going to be playing the Celtics in the next round, and like I've said, I think that they do have some pressure surrounding them a little bit in terms of the future roster construction surrounding this core. JB Bickerstaff, I think, is coaching for his job a little bit as well. But I think that, this has been a very encouraging start for the Cavs, where Donovan Mitchell, he drops 30 points in game 1. Yesterday, he came out blazing in the first quarter at least. He cooled off from there, but again, it was a very well-rounded performance from this team. And now keep in mind, they only put up 96 points. The Magic are an incredible defense themselves as well, so you do have to take that into consideration as well. But yeah, just most of their players, going out and providing some solid minutes for them. Can't be mad at them by any means. Again, expectations for them, I wouldn't say they are tremendously better than they are last year. I do still feel like they have some questions surrounding the future of this core, but hey, you take the wins as they come and you try and build momentum so that when they do go off on to, again, potentially face the Boston Celtics, who are the favorite in the conference, that they're confident in themselves. So let me know if you have any extra thoughts on this series as well. Probably going to be the least talked about series from this first round in general. We'll see if maybe Paolo is able to sort of elevate the Magic to any sort of heights. They're going to be going back to Orlando. I probably feel like this ends in 4 or 5 for the Cavs. But again, if you have any different perspectives, would be happy to hear them. But we are now going to be taking our final break of the show. And when we come back on the other side, I want to sort of switch gears a little bit to talking a little NFL, where we had a trade yesterday that broke during the show about the New York Jets moving on from quarterback Zach Wilson, and I want to sort of unpack all of that. So stick with us and we will be right back.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast. We have been all NBA today, talking about the latest action from the playoffs. But now I want to switch it up a little bit and talk some NFL. While we were on the show yesterday, we had the breaking news that Zach Wilson, the former number 2 overall pick for the New York Jets, has been traded to the Denver Broncos. Have a little bit more details on what specifically went on in that deal. It was Wilson being traded along with a 7th round pick in exchange for a 6th. So just about the minimum a team could trade for necessarily in terms of a pick swap. Meanwhile, the Broncos do also add a player in Wilson who is more than likely probably an asset that has run its course for the most part in terms of being an actual starting caliber quarterback. But at the same time, they add to their QB room here that is pretty short-handed. Just Jarrett Stidham and Ben DiNucci in the room going into yesterday, at least. Now they add Zach Wilson. I don't hate Jarrett Stidham as a quarterback necessarily anyways, so maybe he ends up as the starting quarterback, but either way, their franchise guy is not currently in the room, which does sort of dive into a deeper conversation surrounding whether or not they address that need in the draft, specifically in the first round, where they have been talked about as a team that could potentially trade up. They have the number 12 overall pick. Before J.J. McCarthy really started making his rise to what seems like he's going to be in the top 5 potentially, then McCarthy was being slated around that 12 pick of a potential pickup there. Michael Penix Jr. could also fall in that range as well. It seems like Bo Nix is falling out of the first round as a whole. I mean, if I'm the Broncos, and I'm not saying in the first round, but if he's available in the second round, I would maybe even be willing to move up a couple picks to go get him, as long as it doesn't mean giving up too much. I feel like you can't really roll out with that quarterback room for next year. Zach Wilson, if he is ever going to be anything, it's not going to be a day one starter in Denver. By the way, just one other detail on the deal that I forgot to mention is the fact that the Jets and Broncos are going to split his salary for the upcoming season. Can't imagine his 5th-year option is going to be picked up, so this could just be a brief landing spot for Wilson, or he could end up, potentially, if things behind the scenes, because again, I don't think that he's going to be at least the day one starter, but if things behind the scenes go well, maybe he works out a little bit of a deal for himself, as the Broncos do seem like they have a little bit of at least retooling, if you want to call it that. Now, maybe they're not, completely... They're not a complete disaster here. I don't feel good about the team necessarily at all. Everybody points to that win streak during the middle of the year and says, oh, Russell Wilson, he was playing a lot better and was sort of getting himself into shape. The turnover differential in that stretch of winning games was very much not sustainable, and we saw that as they sort of fell out of the picture later in the year. But that being said, they were in the playoff picture for a little bit there. They have Sean Payton, who is going to be a Hall of Fame head coach. So I'm not really sure what direction the Broncos are going to go here. Again, number 12 overall pick. Are they going to take a quarterback in the first round? I don't know if it would be, at least just for, satisfying the fans for a bit. As a Patriots fan myself, who in 2021, that same year that Zach Wilson was drafted, the Patriots took Mac Jones with the 15th overall pick, which felt good because there was at least something to look forward to for the Patriots after coming off of a season where Cam Newton was clearly dealing with some type of shoulder injury and their pass game was just horrendous. It's at least exciting as a fan to have somebody, could he end up being the future? I just feel like when you're looking in this scenario, and again, you're looking at probably the 5th quarterback off the board, is it really worth it to, make a not smart gamble on a quarterback that late in the first round just because you want to look better on paper? Who knows, really? Definitely up for debate. I feel like the Broncos, they have other situations going on. The Cortland Sutton deal where he's not showing up to voluntary workouts right now. He wants a more guaranteed deal. I like Sutton a lot. I feel like it would be in their interest to pay him, but I guess we'll just see how the Broncos choose to handle all of this. But from the Jets' perspective of this deal as well, this is just something where they needed to kind of wash their hands of this disastrous situation that happened with Zach Wilson that I definitely don't want to 100% put it on him. There was a lot of dysfunction surrounding the Jets. There was the story that came out, I believe The Athletic put it out, about sort of what went on behind closed doors in the Jets locker room this past season, at least, when Zach Wilson was sort of thrown back into the starting role. But one way or another, whether you want to blame the situation or not, there is some point where it was just clear that Wilson wasn't the right fit for the Jets, and that, he's a player that really gained a lot of steam headed into that draft during the process itself with the pro days and with some of those throws that he would make sort of, rolling out and throwing it deep again without wearing pads in a much quieter situation. But Wilson, during his first handful of years, just was never the answer for them. And again, I think for the Jets here, they were in a situation where having him in the room. Now, if things were perfect last year and Aaron Rodgers was fully healthy and he was able to sort of take Zach Wilson under his wing, maybe that things could have played out differently there. But then it sounds like Rodgers sort of distanced himself from Wilson once he ended up getting injured, and that relationship that we saw them building during, preseason, and if you watched any of Hard Knocks last year, it was fixated on the Jets, and it seemed like they were sort of getting along. That just never panned out, and Wilson was put into a very difficult position last year, I think. But all of that to be said, Wilson is, I think it's going to be very hard for him to resurrect his career from being labeled as a bust going number 2 overall. And really, when you look at that 2021 draft class, I just talked about Mac Jones a minute ago, but he at least is sort of in pretty underwhelming company in general in terms of quarterbacks, where, again, 2021 draft, they haven't even hit their 5th-year options yet. And 4 out of the 5 quarterbacks that were selected in the first round are already on their second team with, Trevor Lawrence. He's going to get his contract this offseason, and the Jaguars are going to be set up with him for the future. But then it was Wilson, who's been all types of a mess. Trey Lance, who has hardly even played in the NFL. He was on the bench for his rookie season, ended up getting hurt at the very beginning of his second year in just his second start. And then Brock Purdy, the 7th overall pick, the Mr. Irrelevant in the 2022 draft, ends up stealing his job from him. And then Justin Fields, who we feel like there is some potential ceiling with him, but at the same time, some of the late game turnovers and some of the decision making, the inability to be an elite passer has held him up. He was just traded this offseason as well. And, Mac Jones, who I also feel like could have been at least a solid game manager quarterback that could have held a job for a bit there if it weren't for the disastrous situation in New England. And I do feel like that is a little bit of a theme when it comes to that 2021 class and how NFL franchises should look headed into the 2024 draft, is that really I would say that Wilson, Fields, and Mac Jones were all thrown into very bad situations from a coaching standpoint and from a I wouldn't even fully say pressure, because I wouldn't say that, Justin Fields was facing an immense amount of pressure headed into his career. But I would, for both Wilson and Jones, I think that playing in those types of markets, the Jets wanting to finally hit on their guy, the Patriots hoping that they had their replacement for Tom Brady, which was never going to be the case, especially, being selected where he was, and the offensive playmakers really in all 3 of those situations from Wilson, Jones, and Fields. Now, Trey Lance, he was injured, but there's not really, it feels like, too much of an excuse for him not panning out other than him just not being the guy. And there were a lot of question marks surrounding him headed into the draft process. I actually did sort of like some of the potential with him, but San Francisco, their issue was the fact that it never seemed like Shanahan was fully bought in on him in general. And, he had the weapons around him, so if he was going to be a good quarterback, he could have worked out. Brock Purdy has in that exact same system, and he was not seen to at least have anywhere near the ceiling that Lance did headed into that draft. But that being said, there was a whole lot of drama in terms of which decision makers in the 49ers organization wanted Lance. Mac Jones was a name that was thrown out there for a bit as well. Maybe it was a smoke screen, but I don't think that Shanahan was ever the biggest fan of Trey Lance from day one. All of this to be said, I just feel like when it comes to this year's upcoming draft, where, there are a bunch of these teams that are going to be in potential situations, I would say that outside of the top three, and there are going to be teams that are looking to sort of satisfy that quarterback need immediately. And granted, some of the teams that are potentially being talked about to move up do have some more legitimate weapons than any of those teams from 2021 did. The Raiders are being talked about. They have Michael Mayer, who they just drafted last year, the tight end out of Notre Dame. Of course, they have Devontae Adams. The Vikings have Justin Jefferson. But again, just sort of understand, the Saints are a team too where I feel like they are a ways away from, being Super Bowl contenders. I know that a lot of Saints fans weren't happy with Derek Carr this past season, but I do feel like it's a risk to give up extra assets as well to go get a quarterback. But we'll see. The NFL draft is on Thursday. We're going to be coming to you with a whole bunch of coverage surrounding that as the week pushes on here and as these NFL rosters sort of fall into place. But that is all we have time for today. Thank you very much for tuning into the GSMC Sports Podcast. Thank you to the GSMC Sports Network for allowing us to host this show. Just a reminder to like, follow, subscribe wherever you keep up with us. Check us out on social media, and we are live every weekday, 2 to 3 p.m. Eastern. We will be back tomorrow afternoon, and we will see you then.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet. Damn, ain't that great.